The LA Kings enter this offseason with many questions. We try to answer some of them with Kings longtime broadcaster Jim Fox on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and we are also on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, the weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. We are always excited to have former LA Kings player and longtime broadcaster Jim Fox join us. And while we wish we could be talking to him about the LA Kings playing in the second round of the playoffs, we are still very happy to have him join us on the show. You can follow him on Twitter at JimFox16. Hey, Jim, thanks for doing this. How are you doing today?
Eddie, we're doing okay. Yeah, gearing it up, gearing it down, and just trying to decompress and get ready for the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Kings obviously aren't still playing hockey, which is something we're disappointed in, although it's hard to say that the result of the series against Edmonton was maybe not expected. Obviously, the Oilers finished ahead of the Kings in the standings. They had more points. They've beaten us the last 2 years. But on the Kings, I think the inconsistency from them all year was something that we saw in the playoffs as well. There were certainly times this year where they looked like they could play with any team in the league, and you could argue in games 2, 4, and 5, they were certainly right there. They only won one of them. And then there were times this year when they didn't play up to expectations, and in games 1 and 3 of the playoffs, they weren't really that competitive. So I guess you could argue that the talent for the Kings might be there, but the consistency isn't. How do you get that consistency, especially when playoff time comes around?
Well, Eddie, I'll just hate to put a damper on it, but to me, the first element of inconsistency is talent. We're all able to perform at a peak high level sometimes. Not all of us are able to do it on a more than not basis. And so that's where you start. I think when you look into the Kings season and how it went, and you're right, the playoffs were the exact same way. Great start, everything clicking systematically. Everyone on board, got away from it. So then you start to ask the questions, why? As you're asking right now, consistency. Well, first of all, one area that could be, and this is just speculation, I'm just trying to figure out reasons too, is that maybe I said it during the season, Eddie, I said this team was searching for its soul. And to me, that's different than identity. So perhaps you had some that were on board 100%. They were on board at the beginning. Maybe it started to drift. I'm talking about the way the team is expected to play, system-wise. And when that wavers, then you start having a little bit of some guys are, some guys are not. And then everyone is not pulling the rope the same time and the same way. So that's the first thing I think of right there. I know at the end of the season, and with a couple of players we talked to, there were some players who said, yeah, we like this kind of conservative 1-3-1, no problem with it. Then you had other players, younger players going out and saying, maybe it's time to try something else. I think that's what I was hitting on during the season as far as the soul and trying to get everything together. So if there was one reason why inconsistency, I would go that way. Then you just narrowed down one more thing, if I can, long-winded. The special teams, obviously, when you're talking about regular season, consistent on the penalty kill all season long. They were right at the top. I think they dropped to second maybe the last 10 days of the season. So that was you get into the playoffs, and sometimes you have that juggernaut on the other side on the power play, and that's what happened. So I thought that was a possibility. I think a lot of people did because of Edmonton's power play. What we didn't expect was the huge drop-off on the power play. Not that it was great during the regular season, but it was okay. It was better than middle of the pack. And so you had that you talk about inconsistency. 5-on-5, everything's good, but just, man, the special teams dropped off the face of the earth, and that's the reason they did not win round number 1.
Yeah, and I think for fans and I'm sure for the players themselves, I mean, that's got to be the most frustrating thing is that we knew going into the season the PK was one thing that we talked about addressing, and they did. And it was so good in the regular season, and then it just was not there at all in the postseason. Is it that the Oilers are just that good, or was there something the Kings didn't do in the postseason that they did for most of the regular season on the PK?
I think people will tell you it's a little bit of both. I hate answering questions that way. So I'm going to go this way, and I'm going to go the Oilers are that good. I think they've proven that, not only against the Kings, against basically, the last 3-year segments. They've just, 2 years ago, they basically had a historic rate on the power play. It just fell off a little bit this year. They certainly were prepared to adjust more so than most. So the Kings, again, right? Kings are known as a systematic. That's what they do. A to B, B to C, C to D, systematically. That's the way they win games. Edmonton's power play is improvising. They have 3 or 4 different setups. Most teams have 2 setups. That's about it. They have 3 or 4, and that's just the starting point. Then they improvise from that, and that's what makes them so dangerous. So do you want the one-timer down low at Draisaitl? Do you want McDavid on both sides of the ice? Do you want Hyman in front, or you want Bouchard taking slap shots? You pick your poison, and unfortunately the Kings were not able to stop it. Now the Kings will tell you they didn't execute well enough. And I think certainly during this season, it was a conscious decision to allow down low plays through the crease. Take away the slot shot, but allow the 2-on-1s down low. Give more responsibility to the goaltender. Get your sticks on pucks through the crease. Take a guy on a bad angle, make him make a perfect shot. Well, what also happened was you ran into a team that could make the perfect play. We showed numerous examples in our pre and post game shows, and of course during the replays of the Edmonton Oilers threading the needle. I'm talking about a space between a stick and skates, between legs. They get the pass there, they make it work that way. So, Eddie, I hate going into the playoffs when you're top of something, because there's only one way for that thing to go. That's down. And the Kings were on the top of the power play, and unfortunately, on top of the penalty kill, and unfortunately, it went down.
I know a lot of people in the national media were saying before the season that the Kings' goaltending could be an issue. And of course, they won their 2 Stanley Cups with a future Hall of Famer, Jonathan Quick. But we've seen several teams win cups recently with guys who weren't necessarily Vezina Trophy winners or certainly Hall of Famers. How do you feel about the Kings' goaltending this season? And do you think the Kings can go where they want to go with a similar goaltending situation going forward?
Well, Eddie, just talking today, Rob Blake and Luc Robitaille addressed the media, and they're talking about possible systematic changes. So the Kings system was designed to be conservative and emphasize defense and make it easier on goaltenders. And a couple of years ago, didn't happen. This year, the goaltending numbers were fine. But I think there's an argument to be made that the Kings goaltending are just systematic goaltenders. They're following through because the system is set up to protect them. So they did their job this year. The numbers will tell you that. The save percentage was well up. The saves above expected, it was well up. The penalty kill save percentage, well up. All of those things went up. So the goaltending's not. Having said that, I don't think you're going to have the same tandem back. And I would expect the Kings to try to find something else on the market. I think that would be one of their highest priorities. Are you going to upgrade Cam Talbot or David Riddick? I think you can make the argument you can as far as what is expected. They did the job, but I would expect an upgrade in that area personnel-wise.
You mentioned the Kings finding their soul. I know the term culture gets thrown around a lot. Andrei Kopitar was asked about it in his exit interview. What does that term mean to you? And do you think there's an issue with the Kings culture?
Oh, I don't think there's an issue with the culture, because you have 3 guys on the team right now that won 2 Stanley Cups. And that's Kopitar, and that's Doughty, and that's Trevor Lewis. So they know what it takes to win. If anyone has a problem with the way they approach things, then they should be looking themselves in the mirror and saying, well, our way has to be better. Otherwise, I'm going to listen to you and defer to you. I think there was how to get it done. There was a discussion. There was differing opinions on how to get things done. Culture to me is the unwavering element of your team, the thing that will not change, regardless of what goes on, will not change. And in the past, that has been defense. That will not change. Now, maybe there's going to be a shift. Again, today at the meeting, they're talking about the players' exit meetings. Players talking about maybe it'd be fun to try something else, maybe a little bit more aggressive as opposed to conservative. Rob Blake mentioned today, yes, they're going to talk to the coaching staff. They're going to consider and really discuss possible systematic changes. So, again, is that your culture? I guess the culture can shift. It can, adjust every once in a while. But it's nice to know that you do have guys that have been there before and won it all before, because that could be a baseline. But if system has to do with the culture, there probably will be an adjustment there.
More with longtime Kings broadcaster Jim Fox coming up next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. All right, we're pausing the hockey talk for just a second to talk about Monopoly Go. There's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments, whether you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. Get unique stickers. You can trade with friends to compete for albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you're smashing their buildings and heisting their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko machines. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. We continue with former Kings forward Jim Fox. And Jim, looking back on the season, one of the biggest storylines obviously was the trade that was made to bring in Pierre-Luc Dubois. Clearly a lot was expected of him this season. I think it's fair to say that he didn't deliver. He said several times in his exit interview he knows that he has to be better. Is there anything specifically that you see from him that you could say that area needs to be better?
I could say puck possession, protection of the puck. I think PL in the past has relied upon his skill to be able to maneuver around traffic. I think the Kings, certainly the way they approach things, especially with younger kids that come into their system and their franchise, they really emphasize protecting the puck. So I think PL can work on that. Now, he's not a young player anymore. I'm going to give you an example. I felt that Quentin Byfield, when he came into the NHL, was extremely skilled. We see that now. That hasn't changed. Yeah, he can work against him. What he learned to do better was protect the puck, how to take contact and how to give contact, getting to a lower position when you go into or when you're taking contact. So again, PL's an old dog, so to speak. It's tough to teach that old dog new tricks, but that would be the one area I would work on him with, that is to get into a lower, more powerful position when anytime there's traffic or someone's going to try to take the puck from you with contact, or you're going to try to separate the man from the puck yourself with contact. There are some things he does, Eddie, that really does open him up for criticism. There are. The eye test, the way it looks. And now he goes into, he swoops a little bit. He kind of skates by situations. One hand on his stick, doesn't look. He has an upright skating style, right? So he kind of looks a little bit lazy, and it does. I mean, it looks that way. Now, if I can go to another, I remember they said the same thing about Darryl Strawberry when he used to play, outfield for the Mets and the Dodgers and think. I think he came to the Dodgers, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Yeah. So, and then they would, once kind of analytics became part of baseball and all that, then they would actually measure how far he went to track down a fly ball, and found out that he was one of the top guys in the league of the ground covered. But just because they had the long loping style, he didn't look good doing it, right? And he was criticized, wasn't he, for being, lazy and all that. Well, Luke is in the same situation. His style gives off that. And that's why he's open to criticism. Now, I think he has proven in past years, that he can produce at a decent level. So that tells me he's doing things at a higher level. He's not lazy, all those things. but those are the areas I think that catch everyone's eye. I think we'll see. Will he be used differently? If there is a system change, and believe me, and Pierre talked about it in his exit meeting, and this, I'm sure there's a lot of people that say that he's making excuses. Well, I'm going to say he's giving you reasons. The Kings system is rather complicated, and he's a coach's son. He analyzes the game. And a lot of times, I bet you this year, he was caught watching and not doing and not moving because he was trying to figure things out. And it wasn't working up here, so it didn't work down on his legs. And so that's something that can help him improve. And then the other thing would be this, just the second season in the new city. Just get by all that initial stuff. All of that said, his numbers are nowhere near what's needed. The $8.5 million is something you have to consider. I don't put a lot on that now until Anze Kopitar retires. At that point, then all of a sudden, he's going to have to start earning that 8.5 as far as offensive production. But that still has to get better. It still has to get better. And I think it starts with just that lower center of gravity, because he's a big kid. He's a strong kid. He can do that. And he has the hands. He has the shot. But for some reason, I just felt that he was a little bit on the perimeter and not down low in the trenches.
I know you've never been an NHL head coach before, but I'm just curious your thoughts on, as a coach, the difficult position you're put in when an organization has made a financial commitment to a player and then where you play that player. There's an argument, I guess, to be made that Beelzebub wasn't really put in a position when he's on the third line playing with guys like Jared Anderson-Dolan and a rookie and Alex Laferriere, that's not really helping him to be the best he could be. At the same time, you got to earn your ice time. That's just as core as you can get to being a hockey player, right? So how do you manage that where you've made the commitment financially and you may need to put a player in a certain position, but at the same time, he isn't earning that position perhaps?
Rob Blake mentioned it today, and I believe him, and I believe it's true 100% of the spots out there. Unless you have a team that's rebuilding and your GM can explain to the coach the pieces and how they expect those pieces to grow together. So maybe you don't necessarily have 100% control, but most coaches have 100% control. So Todd McClellan and Jim Hiller both kind of played PL the same way, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Well, then that shows you it's probably not, the coach has the decision. So at the end of the season, PL wasn't playing those minutes. He started when Jim Hiller took over after the All-Star break. He was given a new elevated role and he lasted, and then he tailed off. Then the coach says, you're not earning your spot. I'm not going to play you much anymore. So, and Tom McClellan did that, right? At the beginning of the season, had him on Kopitar and boom, 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 all these different combinations. And let's see if you can play here. And then it went away. So now it's up to PL to raise that level. That's up to him. I just mentioned about the 8.5 and not equating production to that. This is where I will equate something there. At 8.5, you are not a player that needs other players to make you better. Mm-hmm. At 8.5, you better make the other guys around you better. And that's where I don't buy this where he's playing, because if he was doing what was needed, he would have played in a higher role.
We've talked a little bit about the 1-3-1 and a possible change. The Kings have said they have not made a decision on who the next head coach will be. Would it be Jim Hiller having the interim tag removed? Would they bring in somebody else? I know Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty in their exit interviews understandably said they're not looking at any kind of a rebuild as their careers are obviously winding down. Every year here on out is precious for those guys to get back to where they want to go. With a different style, with a different voice, with some tweaks to the roster, is there a path in the near future, you think, for the Kings to get more consistent and get to where guys like Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty hope to go before their careers are over?
Well, that's the plan, certainly. And I think that the big concern for me is this. When you do make changes to a system, it's going to take you 2 months, I believe, of regular season play to get to that comfort feeling within that system. Now, the Kings, I believe, did make some tweaks after Jim Hiller did jump aboard. Tweaks, right? Because you can't change it. You can. If you're a young team and you don't have the goal of making the playoffs, yes, you can change a system. If you're a team like the Kings, they gave the mandate to Jim Hiller, make the playoffs, and they did. They made some tweaks. There were certain areas where the 1-3-1 was no longer the default. It used to be the default. That's what you go to. It kind of shifted a little bit to a few other areas. That's the possibility of getting this group to another level. You know, the personnel, another thing too, Eddie, this is what I expect. Again, we don't know, but there's some free agents, the Kings, cap. Are they going to be able to sign everyone? If they don't, Rob Blake mentioned today, Turcotte, Clark, and Thomas will have a chance to make the line. If those young players make the team next year, that means they're not making a lot of money. And that means there might be some cash openings out there to go get someone else. You can think of it one way. Oh, you lost Arvidsson for nothing. You lost Matt Roy that's not the case. What you lose those guys for is cap space. And then how you use that cap space. So how they're going to do it, how they're going to, I think the personnel will be significantly different. If the system changes, that's how this current roster gets to the places we want them to go. I'm confident they can do it. I will say this, compared to the rest of the league. This year, Eddie, before the playoffs, there was a lot of people that came to me and said, oh, yeah, 2012, we changed our coach during the middle of the season, and, we were known for defense, and we did some things. Oh, we won the cup. That team was the best roster the Kings had, certainly since I've been here. I think I can make the argument 14 might have been even a better roster, but I don't compare those situations. I did not think the Kings were knocking on the door in this year's playoffs. I didn't. It's always possible. No question it's always possible, especially if the Kings could have got that elite level in the playoffs that they had the first 24 games, there was a chance. But now they're going to have to go through another change. So that's going to be interesting. Again, I think it's going to cost them 2 months at the beginning of the next season. Can they just be around for those 2 months as opposed to getting too far behind the 8 ball? I think that'll be very important next year if the changes happen that I expect to happen.
A little bit more with Jim Fox. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of those younger players that he mentioned. We'll do that here next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. It is playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. Unfortunately, we can't bet on the Kings, Lakers, or Clippers, but how about betting against the Oilers, Nuggets, and Mavericks who beat our LA teams? And hey, the Dodgers are in first place. They're favorites to win it all. It's still a great time of year to be a sports fan, and you can make it even more fun by winning with FanDuel. You can bet on who will win or lose or how many home runs Shohei Ohtani will hit this year. You can do it all with FanDuel. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, a couple more questions with former Kings player and longtime broadcaster Jim Fox. And Jim, looking ahead to this offseason, we know that you mentioned there are some unrestricted free agents, there are some restricted free agents, and there's things that the Kings need to address. But looking at some of the younger players, I mean, Quentin Byfield, we know, emerged this season. Jordan Spence and Alex LaFerriere had very fine rookie seasons. I guess Byfield's the obvious one. Hard not to be excited about him, but just talk about some of the younger players that we saw on the Kings roster this season.
First of all, Eddie, I'm going to taper it with you have to be very careful. I think in any franchise, you fall in love with your prospects more than the rest of the league falls in love with your prospects. Having said that, impact player, I believe Brandt Clark will be an impact player. I mean, he will be controlling the play when he's on the ice. Whether he gets to the first quarterback on the first power play next year, who knows? Certainly second unit for sure. But once he gets to the offensive zone, he is a rover. And he will change the way other teams have to defend the Kings. because he has to be contended with. He is that creative. Byfield has taken those strides. He will still have to get to another level. He does. And he's proven that, he's taken those steps. Great work ethic, applies himself daily. He talked in his exit meeting, and it was very concerning to me because it was a health issue. He said he had some sickness issues near the end of the season, lost a lot of weight again. So I'm assuming there's something that has to be addressed medically, not orthopedically, but internal medicine. Something that, just a guess, just a speculation, because specifics were not brought up. But he will have to take another step. He will be a centerman, I think, certainly when Kopitar is no longer here. Whether that happens sooner, before that, who knows? If he takes half the step next year that he took this year, Kings are in a good spot there with Byfield. Laferriere is one of those guys that I fell in love with. Okay. I think he has a lot more to give, only because he'll be given the opportunity to do so. I look at his skating stride. I look at his north-south. I look at his release. And then I watch him every day in practice. After practice, he has the skill of a 30-goal scorer. He has that in his hands. He has that in his shot. Now, he'll need to be elevated in the lineup, get more ice time, quality ice time, power play ice time, those types of things. But if he keeps progressing, keep in mind, it was first year pro. I mean, right out of college. So that's a big jump nowadays. So that's the guy I look at. Turcotte, outstanding work ethic, fast enough to play in the NHL, just has not stayed healthy enough. I don't expect him to be an impact player, but I hope Alex can prove me wrong. And Akil Thomas maybe is a name that's come up, same thing. Okay. I don't see him impact. I see him bottom six as opposed to top six. Yeah, he had 4 goals, 3, whatever it was at the end. That's something that he has to continue to prove and prove me wrong. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Foggy Mo is another guy who scores, lights the light up down there. He's more of a player that needs a fit in a lineup. He needs that certain chemistry. He needs that certain ingredients around him. I know he's very deadly on the power play, the one-time shot, those types of things. Now, for the most part at the NHL level, a lot of penalty kills take that away. So you would be taking away Fogimo's best asset. So I think those are the names. Maybe, Eddie, if there's anyone else you had in mind. Portillo's the goaltender who's doing very well. But again, goalies usually 2 or 3, years before they get to the point where they can log the NHL workload. So, but I do expect, and Rob mentioned at least 3 names. If you have 3 young guys in the lineup, I love that impact. I love it. But to me, the bigger impact would be the cap space that's opened up because you're not paying young guys as much money as you will when they get into their second and third contract.
Jim, I hope I'm not embarrassing you by saying this, but I can't imagine Kings hockey without you. You've been literally doing the games as long as I've been a Kings fan. And I've said 30 plus years. I remember the prime ticket days back with you and Bob, and you're still going strong. You're still looking great, by the way. Is it the wine every day, or what's your secret?
I'm not going to stop that until they tell me to.
Well,
thank you. Appreciate it. It's fun. It's disappointing. Again, it's based on your expectations. So, after the start, there was a lot of people. And I remember doing a podcast for the Kings, and I was going, enjoy this while it lasts, because it's not going to be here all year. So you get to an area. There's a few other things. The Fiala has to be. Kevin Fiala had such an inconsistent start, but you know what, Eddie? His last 30 games were almost flawless. And then it got to the postseason, and he just didn't have the same production. The power play, he just wasn't as crisp. If he takes another step, there's an impact player that's getting to another level. So there's a lot to look forward to here. Drew Doughty having one of his best seasons in a long time. But now we'll see again. I think the biggest thing of interest to me is what happens in the system next year and whether they tweak that.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing where it goes, but we know that you'll be there helping us to understand it and explaining it to us as Kings fans. And we appreciate you. We appreciate your work. We appreciate you taking the time for the fans, whether it's on social media or doing things like this. So, Jim, again, always appreciate your time. I'm really, really grateful for it. And thank you very much for doing this.
Eddie, thank you. I appreciate coming on all the time. I appreciate the questions, and I appreciate your knowledge of the game. So thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Jim. And we'll talk to you soon. That is Jim Fox. And again, we appreciate any time he gives us some of his time. We also appreciate you, our everydayers. If you're listening and watching Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Wednesday's show, we are going to begin to look at the offseason, focus on the roster for the Kings, who's going to be back, who will likely be back, who may not be back. Thursday, Jared Shaffron from the Ontario Reign is going to join us. We're going to talk about the Reign's run in the AHL playoffs. Then Friday, another fan feedback show. If you want to get an email into the show for that, lockedoneddie@gmail.com is where you can leave your comments. Also on YouTube as well in the comments section. We'd love for you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.
You are